Welcome to Conversations with the CEO. I'm Ann Peterson, the Director of Communications, and today we have a special edition of Conversations. This will be the first of two parts with a sit-down chat with CEO Tim O'Keefe, who at the end of this year will be retiring. Congratulations, Tim.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks for joining us.
Yep, thanks for having me.
So on paper, when you think about it, 7 years doesn't seem like that long. But when you look at all of the things that have been accomplished in those 7 years, it takes up pages. Yeah. So does it feel as if sort of this career almost summed up an entire lifetime in one sitting?
That's a good question. So thinking back over these 7 years, it goes like that. Mm-hmm. But not the last 2.5 years. The last 2.5 years were just really, really difficult, and they felt like 9 years. But it's been quite a journey, and we've done a ton here, and I think that a lot of people, the community is constantly turning over, so not everybody sees or even knows about some of the things that have been accomplished over the last few years. And so anyway, it'll be kind of fun to kind of rehash some of that and talk about some of our successes and probably a couple of failures in there too.
So that's actually what I'd like to do today. Let's look back over the past 7 years. Let's talk about some of the big accomplishments that you've seen here in Rossmoor and how Rossmoor's grown in those 7 years. So going back, you started December of 2016. And going through some of the things that happened, those first 4 months, you had the lease signing for Creekside Grill, mm-hmm. and you had the Comcast contract, which has brought service, cable, and internet to all of the residents in here. And the $10 million in funding was secured for the fitness center. That was just the first 4 months, so you didn't really get a honeymoon period.
No.
What was it like when you first started here? How difficult was it to sort of assimilate and to jump in on some of these major projects?
So I actually started in mid-November. Okay. So I got a couple more weeks before. And those 2 weeks, I think my predecessor, Warren Salmons, was here for, I think, 10 days or 2 weeks, so we overlapped, and which was super helpful. He had done a lot here as well, and very helpful in showing me around. And then he literally handed me a couple of folders and said, "Tim, you're going to negotiate the Comcast contract. Oh, and by the way, we're right in the middle of finalizing the design plans for a $10 million renovation of the fitness center," and so immediately had those two things dropped on my lap. Oh, and also, by the way, Tim, we also are going to install a solar farm, a 1 megawatt solar farm, and you'll have to negotiate that contract too. So all three of those things landed on my plate literally on day one, and at that time, there was I don't know, maybe it's just because I was the new person here, mm-hmm. that everybody wanted to meet me, and at the time my office was located in the recreation department, so there was no barrier to entry, and literally people would open my door, walk right in. If I was in a meeting, my door was always open except for when I was in a meeting, but it didn't matter. Residents would walk in and tell me their issues and their problems, ignore the fact that I'm sitting here with 2 or 3 or 4 other people in my office, and carry on a conversation about what the plumbing that broke in their manor or their neighbor's manor that's caused problems for them. So it's been interesting in the very beginning, being handed these really, really huge projects. The biggest projects, really, I think that I handled the whole time I was here were really in that first year. Although we had the volume of projects here has never let up. But there was a lot of concern from residents around personal safety. And so that became really clear to me from my very first day here, as they lined up to talk to me in my office. And everybody wanted to tell me about the fact that they didn't believe the entrance was safe. They didn't believe that there was adequate parking, so that they were getting in car accidents in parking lots. They didn't believe that there was safety in their homes, that they should be able to leave their doors unlocked, and you have to keep it safe enough so that we can leave our doors unlocked. And I'm exaggerating that just a little bit, but that was pretty close to. So safety was a common theme, and really informed a lot of the work that we did here in the 7 years later, and which is to this day still, safety is probably issue number one. Whether it's wildfire safety, safety in the home from trips and falls, safety in and out of their cars, in and out of our clubhouses. All of these things are all around personal safety. And, there's been some high profile safety related incidents here over the years that get people's attention. And certainly, the wildfires that happened in 2017 in Napa and Sonoma, 2018 in Paradise really got this community's attention too, all again around safety. So yeah, that was the common theme in the beginning, was around personal safety. And then, by the way, Tim, get these other big projects done, because we want to save $25 million on our solar or electric energy with solar. We want to save $65 million on our Comcast bill. We want to, save all these. And we want this beautiful new fitness center. So hurry up and get these done.
So talking about safety, in 2017, your first full year here, you had the traffic and pedestrian study, and you also had the acquisition of the Nixle alert system.
Mm-hmm.
So again, two very big projects. How do things like that really shape what's happened here with the perspective of safety, but also the nuts and bolts of keeping Rossmoor safe?
So Nixle, there aren't many products like that available. And so when we began researching, how can we communicate quickly to everybody, at least those that sign up for it? And at this point now, it's the vast majority of the community. We think it's got a pretty high adoption rate, probably in the 80 to 90% range.
Wow,
so very, very high. So that helped transform our ability to communicate to residents quickly, because prior to that, all we had was the newspaper and the TV. And the TV is a good resource because a lot of people are watching it all the time, or often.
Right.
And so that would be a good way to get the word out about something, but it's not instantaneous. You have to have the TV on, and really, the Comcast deal, which for the first time included internet, was transformative. So, and there was a lot of pushback. A lot of residents didn't think that was worth it. Oh my gosh, yeah. A lot of people felt that demanded it, that we needed to do it. But a lot of people felt, you can't impose that extra fee on me. I'm not going to pay for it. I don't even use the internet. So keep in mind, this is 2015 and then into 2016. And those were the comments, because there was a survey that was done the summer before I came to work here. And the survey, and I don't remember exactly what the numbers were, but I read the survey, and it was, 50, 60% of the community had identified that they used the internet, but 40% didn't. So 4,000 people, that's a lot of people not using the internet. So how are we going to both educate them to the value of why this is important, why this is what's coming down the pike in the world, in order to be connected and to communicate. So having that happen, getting internet was key. And so, I stepped into that whole fight around whether we should have it or not, because there's a lot of people pushing really hard, even though it only ended up adding, I think, $17 to the coupon, $17 for high-speed internet, which at that time, that package that we got for Comcast TV and internet was it was valued at $165 a month. And we got it for $35 plus $17 for the internet.
Wow, that's
$52.
great.
So tremendous savings. You can do the math. That savings is about $110, $112 per month per home times 6,700 units. That's a lot of money in savings. People outside the gate pay the higher number.
Right.
So it's pretty exceptional. So what that allowed us to do about a year later was, when we were trying to figure out, okay, how can we alert the community of things, a broken water pipe or an emergency situation, a fire, whatever. And we began to research some of that and learned about Nixle. There's another product called Code Red that a lot of municipalities use. They either use Nixle or they use Code Red. And but Nixle seemed to offer the better pricing for us and a little less expensive, and so that's what we chose. The downside to Nixle is that everybody gets the message. So when a water line breaks in an entry, or the gas line gets shut off in an entry, the whole community gets the message. It's like I was telling somebody, I live in Lafayette, and I live in a house that's about 15 years older than the first homes here in Rossmoor. My house was built in 1949. And Lafayette is an older community and don't have underground utilities like we do here. So when, and there's no real good method of notification when power or water gets shut off. You just come home, you turn on the faucet, there's no water. Or you turn on the light switch and it doesn't work, or the microwave doesn't work, or whatever. And that's when you know that that you don't have the power. Here, even though in nearly all cases it's an isolated issue, the water line is in this entry or this mutual, but everybody gets it. So it has given the perception that Rossmoor is falling apart. And I can tell you, Lafayette's falling apart way worse than Rossmoor, because I mean, our power and our lights and our cable TV and everything goes out with regularity in Lafayette, but not here. Here, it's just, you know, an entry or two that might be affected, but everybody gets the notification. Hopefully, at some point, we are exploring, which is going to have to be done after I'm gone, but we've been studying now for quite some time another database system for the Valley, which is what our accounting system is driven by, our accounting system, our work order system, all the other software packages like for the access control at the gate and fitness center registrations, golf reservations, all that is linked to a centralized database. And we need a better model. It's clunky the way it works right now. So it can be improved. So we're looking at that, which hopefully when we do that, it'll give us even more refined methods of communication to targeted neighborhoods or streets or entries, as opposed to letting everybody know that the water went out in entry 11 on Golden Rain Road, kind of a thing, you know. So it's given, unfortunately, the impression that Rossmoor is falling apart, and that is not the case. That is definitely not the case. You're just getting notified that somewhere in the valley, somebody's power or water has been turned off for a short period of time.
So looking at Nixle, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, if you will, with the technology that's come inside Rossmoor. And of course, most senior communities, they don't like change. Right. So what's it been like the last 7 years trying to usher in things like Nixle and other more technologically advanced things that can make this community better?
So I would say there's two catalysts, two things that were change agents, if you will. So the first was getting Comcast broadband, the internet. That was the beginning of really getting the community connected. And I would say that when I started in November of 2015, most of the resident correspondence to me at that time was in writing.
Wow.
It's either on telephone or in writing. So people would handwrite a note, or they would type on a typewriter, not a computer, but a typewriter, a typewritten note to me to complain about something. You know, something's broken, or they want something fixed, or they want something improved, or they want a new amenity or whatever. The majority in, you know, November, December, January, February, or thereabouts, was, in fact, probably through a good part of 2016, was still old-fashioned way. Wow. Telephone and handwritten notes and typewritten notes on a typewriter. And then in 2017, January 2017 is when we rolled out the new Comcast package. And in the months leading up to that, in the fall of 2016, fortunately, we had a partnership with the Computer Club here in Rossmoor. And Rona Lashinsky had just become the president of the club, and she was very interested in how the club could support our efforts at bringing up that 40% of the community that weren't using the internet. How can we educate them? Because now they're all going to have access to this amazing new tool. That was kind of her thinking and our thinking. So we were on the same page. And so the club agreed to conduct a whole series of classes and free workshops for the community to learn how to use a computer, how to use a smartphone, how to use the internet. What is the internet? You know, all these, they had a whole series of these classes, and they were well received. I think some of them were recorded for Channel 28. And I think that began to change people who had always been afraid of it, thinking they were going to hit the wrong button. And I know that's my parents. My parents don't use the internet and don't use computers. And my dad, he'll call me on the phone and said, "Tim, remind me how to play Hearts again on the computer." And so I have to walk him through from 400 miles away on the telephone. "Okay, Dad, what's the search bar?" He doesn't know what the search bar is. He doesn't know where the enter key is on the keyboard. So it's a challenge. And that would be how many of the residents were here at that time in 2016. So really, that was the beginning of bringing Rossmore into the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
The others, and then from 2017, 18, 19, more and more people were using email to communicate, but I was still getting a large number of correspondences in writing, not on a computer. And then what changed was the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the pandemic forcing everybody to stay at home and with nothing else to do other than to watch TV. You couldn't go to a show, you couldn't go to a concert, you couldn't go anywhere. And it kind of forced people to now learn how to use Zoom,
Right.
to attend meetings and how to communicate with their family and their friends across the world. And they could do it all this on Zoom. So that was the other big catalyst that really transformed the community. Today, I'll get one handwritten or typed on a typewriter letter about every 1 or 2 months, a single one. So that's the change.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it was really that second tipping point, which was the pandemic, really bringing people into getting them more technologically educated and competent and proficient even in using technology to their advantage.
The silver lining, if you will, of a
Yeah,
bad situation. So let's go back to safety for a moment. So the traffic and pedestrian study in particular, is that what sort of led to the whole change that we saw at Golden Rain Road, Rossmore Parkway, moving all across? Can you talk a little bit about what that study has done and how it's changed the landscape?
So remember when I said that when I first got here, people were lined up at my door to tell me about their concerns about personal safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what led then to the traffic and pedestrian safety study, because people got very, just didn't feel that GRF was listening, that they were seeing people racing down the street, going down Rossmore Parkway at 50 miles an hour, and the speed limit is 25, and they were sure they were going 50 miles an hour, and wanting the police department to do more and wanting to make it safer for pedestrians to cross the street. I want to say, before I got here, so this is prior to 2015, and I don't know when this happened, but one of our workers riding a mower, I think in the street, was hit by a car. And this is years ago, many years ago. And that, I think, got people's attention at that time. And then we've had accidents with golf carts and vehicles, those have happened. Now, recently, this last year or so, we've had a couple of pedestrian incidents with vehicles on the street, or a car has gone off the curb and hit a pedestrian or two pedestrians on the sidewalk. So those are all concerning. So all of those kinds of things led to the traffic and pedestrian safety study. The board recognized that this is something we needed to have outside professionals reevaluate. Now, when Rossmore was built, it was designed by civil engineers who are proficient in traffic and safety design. At the time the roads were built, the city of Walnut Creek would have had to sign off on the design of everything at whatever point during the development of the community. But over time, cars have gotten more powerful. There's more cars here in Rossmore than it was originally designed for. That's why there's so few parking. At the time Rossmore was built in the 1960s, the very first developments here, Mutual One, they were intended to have, nobody had more than one car per household. And so I think they averaged about 1.5 parking stalls per manor. It was about the formula that I think they used at that time. So it's obviously not enough when nearly everybody has 2 cars. So if they have 2 people in the household. So so parking is a real problem in Rossmore, even as we continue to develop all the way up until the early 2000s. It was still what has been a problem. So the traffic and pedestrian safety study, we contacted the city of Walnut Creek and asked them for some recommendations of some companies that do these kinds of things. And so they gave us several that they work with, and the one we selected was one of the bidders, and all they do. So residents who were upset at the recommendations claimed that all this company did was they wanted to design roads so they'd get the business. And this particular company does not do that. They only consult with cities, counties, Caltrans, designing freeways, designing streets, making streets safer, and they don't do any work for construction.
Wow.
Yeah, so they are purely a traffic and safety consulting engineering firm, licensed and everything else. So it was a great report. I think it was around 500 pages. So it was literally,
That's quite
it was a ream of
something to
paper.
get
It was
through,
huge.
yeah.
And at one point I printed it out. I had it on my desk. But so that is why we moved crosswalks. It's why we have the blinking red lights at Golden Rain Road and Tice Creek Road, the blinking stop sign. That's why we have the blinking crosswalk at Tice Creek and Oakmont. The crosswalk between the driving range and the event center is blinking, but that was installed years ago. That was an improvement that they made. I think when they built the event center, they added that at that time. That was before my time. But yeah, so we made a number of improvements that I think have made a significant difference. So that crosswalk at Oakmont, for example. So the crosswalk at Oakmont it deposited you from this is on Tice Creek Road, across from the Gateway parking lot. The corner does not line up with the driveway. What it does is if you take the crosswalk from the corner, it deposited you directly, it's painted, going right into the outgoing lane of traffic. So if you were walking across the street, you were walking directly in to the outgoing lane of traffic coming out of Gateway.
Wow.
It was a wonder why nobody was ever killed there.
Yeah.
So that was an easy recommendation. It was to move it. Normally you would have a crosswalk on a corner, right? But in this case, in order to get it away from the driveway to Gateway, it had to move about a dozen feet or so to the north on Tice Creek Road. You would think that would be met with universal applause, but no. The residents on Oakmont, some of them were very, very upset about that. They wanted, for some reason, they wanted it depositing them, walking across into the outgoing lane of traffic. So anyway, that was an easy fix. We realigned at Rossmore Parkway and Golden Rain Road, we realigned the crosswalk and the location of the painted stop lines. You know, you have the white bar running across the street where the stop sign is. And those weren't lined up correctly either. So whoever did these many, many years ago, they probably met the code at the time.
Right.
But I think it's called a MUTC, I can't remember something Uniform Traffic Code, Municipal Uniform Traffic Code, I think it's what it is. That code has been updated and revised. It's what the whole nation uses to how you design streets and where you place crosswalks and blinking and traffic signals and all those kinds of things. So yeah, that's one of the things that, it's kind of one of those unsung hero things that had a lot of pushback at the time. A lot of people wanted us to do more. A lot of people felt it was a waste of money. A lot of people felt that was a waste of money. But I think the proof is in the numbers. The accident numbers have gone way, way down. Both pedestrian incidents and vehicle incidents at those intersections, way, way down. Is there more that can be done? Yeah, one of the significant recommendations that they made was to create a golf cart lane all the way down Rossmore Parkway and also coming down Tice Creek. So you'd have a green lane. So you have two lanes coming north to south and south to north until you get from the gate until you get to Stanley Dollar Drive. And then it becomes one lane each way after that as you go further south. But the recommendation was to make them into golf cart lanes, which has some merit, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. And the board said, we don't have that kind of money. That might be a great idea, but it might make it safer for the golf carts and the bicyclists. And at the time, the bicycle lobby, all four of them, were pretty active here in advocating for a bike lane is what they really felt they wanted. And I'm sorry, I exaggerated it. Under exaggerated. There's probably more than four, but there isn't that many more. Now the electric bikes are a new thing, and I've seen a few of those around Rossmore now. So that's probably going to be the thing in the future, is going to be electric bikes, but there has not been a whole lot of bike riders in Rossmore that are Rossmore residents. There are some, but there's not a whole lot yet.
So you hear a lot more consensus-wise. Still criticism, but consensus-wise, it seems as if residents are very keen on wildfire safety in here. Fire safety in general, but really wildfire safety. That's another thing that really seems to have evolved in your 7 years here. Can you talk a little bit about where it started and where you feel we are today?
Yep. So up on Upper Golden Rain Road, I can't remember which entry. before you, as you head from Gateway and you go up Upper Golden Rein Road, and you go up the hill up near the Lions Park viewing area. That's a beautiful little shaded, small, concrete kind of viewing platform. You can't see much because the shrubs it's not on our property. The shrubs that look out towards, I guess, to the northeast a little bit. They've grown up a little bit, so you don't have as much as beautiful of a view as it probably was at one time. But it's private property below, so we can't cut those shrubs.
Right.
But right before you get there, that last entry, down the slope is Akalani's school district property. And on that slope, there was a power pole that caught fire. I think it was in 2017. And longtime residents of that entry, had told me that was like the fourth fire that they said in 12 years. And Maureen O'Rourke, your predecessor, she couldn't remember, and she was often my source for historical information about Rossmore, but she said, oh yeah, I know there's been at least one other fire, I don't know about 4, that she was aware of. And she went and found me an article that the paper had written, 10 years before. And sure enough, on that pole, there was a fire. So here we had this fire, and it's a very steep slope. It's like that. And then you have the pole. And the pole comes up from Olympic, and it's the last pole before the power goes underground that comes into Rossmore. It's one of the sources of power coming underground into Rossmore. So it's a very steep slope. You can't really hike to it unless you want to slide down on your bottom, kind of a thing. So that's where the fire was, and the fire swept up the hill, and it stopped the fire department got there quickly, and it stopped right before it got to those units right there, which are maybe 100 feet away, maybe less. So it's close. And when this happened, I immediately got on the phone with the higher-ups at PG&E and told them this is unacceptable, you've got to do something about that. And I had a series of meetings with PG&E. We were meeting quarterly at that time to talk about this and other issues around power service delivery here in Rossmore. And I wanted especially to make them aware of what Rossmore is, that it's a community of retired seniors, average age 77, and if it's an average age of 77, that means half the population is older than 77 and half is younger. So that means that there's a lot of people in their 80s, 90s, even over 100, which probably means that a lot of them rely on power for medicine, refrigeration, breathing equipment, whatever, dialysis equipment, whatever the kinds of equipment that they need to keep themselves semi-independent living here in Rossmore. So I've tried to impress upon PG&E how important it was to keep the lights on, basically, in Rossmore. And if the power does go out, you need to get on it quickly. So they seemed to give us lip service to that, nod their heads and said they agreed and they understand now, thanks for explaining all this to us. But on that particular power pole, they kept setting a deadline and they kept moving it out and out. And this went on for a year. And then there was another fire on that pole. Now what causes the fire, they found, the fire department would locate an animal that had been electrocuted on the ground. And so what happens is, if a squirrel or a large bird and their wings or their tail touches 2 parallel lines, it creates a closed circuit, I guess. I'm not an electrician, I don't even know how this all works, but they get electrocuted.
Right.
And they catch fire, they fall to the ground, they ignite the brush in the ground. So that's how these fires have started. So when I first started advocating to replace that pole, I went down there, and I actually went to the pole. I hiked down there, and I looked closely at the pole, and you could see hundreds, probably thousands of acorns embedded in the pole.
Wow.
From the woodpeckers. This is not an exaggeration. It was like, the pole looked like Swiss cheese. There were so many holes, and I thought, this pole, a windstorm's going to bring this pole down. There are so many holes in this thing. And then now we have to deal with the threat of fire. So after the second fire, I was furious, and I made that known to my colleague at PG&E. And I remember, I think it was in the summer of that year, probably 2017 or 18, and must have been 2017. So they kept telling me October, then December, then January. Each time I'm meeting with them, and it was like, no, you're not. Are you ever going to do this? They go, well, we're going to do it. We just aren't going to do it now. And I remember we were up in a meeting at MOD. They had about they brought 4 or 5 people, and I have the MOD maintenance staff there with me, all the building supervisors, and Paul Donner and Tony Grafals, our lawyer, was there. I mean, it was testy. And this last time, when he pushed the date again, he said it's going to be in January. I said, that is unacceptable. It's got to be done now. He said, we can't. We're in the middle of fire season. We're not going to do this. And at that time, Napa and Sonoma were on fire. And so the residents here were really, really sensitive and nervous about that. Napa, you remember I think it was like 5,000 homes got burned up in Santa Rosa. It was horrible. And then, so I filed a complaint with the Public Utilities Commission. And I fired off copies to our state senator, our state assembly member, our county supervisor, city manager, city council, every name that I could find at PG&E that was a higher up. I sent them all, certified copies. Never heard a word from anybody, except the guy who was the regional director here for PG&E, who called me on the phone, screamed at me, dropped F-bombs on me, and said, we're never talking again. And 3 days later, I hear a helicopter. I'm in my office, and I hear this thump, 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 thump. I'm sitting in my office like, what is that? And it's like lingering for a long time. And I thought, what is it? And I look out the window, I walk outside a gateway, and I look up in the sky, and I can see a helicopter with a pole and looking up towards that hillside up at Upper Golden Rain Road. I thought, oh my gosh, are they replacing the pole? Get in my car, I drove up there. Sure enough, there's a whole bunch of trucks. They got a bulldozer, they got a helicopter drive, because it's too steep. There's no way to get the pole there. They had to drop it down from a helicopter and mount it, however they mounted it, into the ground. And all these guys were down there, doing it. So 3 days or so after I had filed the complaint, PG&E wasn't very happy about it. I never got a comment from a state senator's office or anybody else, but somebody
moved the needle.
Moved the needle, yeah. So that was really the beginning. And then the following year, was the Paradise Fire. Mm-hmm. And was it 83 people died, and 80 of those were over the age of 60. And so that really got the attention. So Napa and Sonoma got everybody's attention, but Paradise frightened people. A lot of residents believed that Rossmoor is just like Paradise. We're not. Right. Those are pine forest, densely forested pine forests. We're oak forest. Oak doesn't burn as quickly as pine does. And we're not as heavily forested on our perimeter as Paradise is. Yes, we only have one formal way out of the valley, but I think there's 9 what we call access points that are other ways to get out of the valley or to get equipment into the valley in the event of a fire or an evacuation. Mm-hmm. So it is something that we have paid a lot of attention to. A lot of residents have demanded that we build a new road somewhere. And honestly, and I've said this many, many times over the years, I put it in the paper at least once a year, isn't going to happen. Last year we tried. There's some private property we tried to access. We thought maybe it's on the southeastern end of the valley. We heard that the property is for sale, and we thought maybe we could get an easement because there is a fire road, fire trail there. And right now PG&E is doing some work, or maybe it's East Bay Mud. I think it's East Bay Mud's doing some work up there, and they have to wait till that work's done before they'll even consider having a conversation with us. But there is a paved road up at the very top of Stanley Dollar Drive. There's the PG&E power station at the top, and then you're going down into Lafayette, basically. There's a new housing development of multi-million-dollar homes there. And it's a private gated community. So people in Lafayette can't access it unless you live there. But in the event of a fire, disaster, whatever, the fire department would likely open that gate up for us to use, but not if there was a fire right there.
Right.
We're not going to send people directly into a fire area. So there's 9 other ways to get in and out of the valley. Some of them are not most of them are not paved, so it isn't going to be every pedestrian car is going to be able to get through there. But we'll let the professionals, the city, the fire department, the police department will manage any evacuation of Rossmore.
So the other thing that Rossmore has that Paradise didn't, the 2 golf courses,
Right.
right down the middle of the valley. So let's segue.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the riparian rights. Let's talk about the water feasibility study for water reclamation. They're big projects. They get a lot of talk by a lot of residents, but they do play an important role in here.
Yeah. So remember our last drought ended in, we actually got rain in April of 2017. The drought was declared over in July of 2017. But for the, 5 or 6 years before that, we were in the worst drought California had ever had at that point. And let's see, so in 2016, it was bad. And we had a mandatory 40% water reduction on the golf course. The state had mandated, the water district, East Bay Mud was cut back our water deliveries by 40%. So the golf course still got some water, but lots of the fairways were very spotty, brown areas, and the high playable surface areas were kept green, but the periphery we allowed to die. And then we shrunk the golf course then. We carved out 12 acres out of the golf course and mulched it and either put bark down or just made it so that it wasn't going to be irrigational.
Irrigated any longer?
It wasn't going to be irrigated any longer. Yeah, so at that time I learned about Diablo Country Club down in Alamo was studying water recycling facilities. So Mark Heptig, the golf pro here, and I went down, I think it was the spring of 2016, so I'd only been here about 6 months, and we drove down, we had lunch with the general manager down there, wanted to learn about that whole process, what's involved. They introduced us to a consultant who we ended up hiring. I came back and told the board about this, and I said, you know what? A green irrigated golf course will not burn. And if we're fearing, at that time, a Santa Rosa style fire, that hadn't happened until the summer of 2017, or fall of 2017. But in 2016, because it was the drought, at that point we were really mostly concerned about how do we keep the golf course green, because the impact on property values here would be significant. And then what's going to be the appetite for the community to pay for a rebuild of the golf course? Millions of dollars, many millions of dollars to do that. We thought slim and none. Residents are not going to want to pony up, but everybody's property value is going to go down 5 to 30% if you have a dead golf course. And yet you can look at examples of this all around the country where golf courses, where housing was built around a golf course, housing development, and the golf course goes out of business. And then the residents all sue each other, and they sue the homeowners association, they sue the developers that are involved, they sue the golf operator. It's just nothing but lawsuits, and property values go down. So we didn't want that to happen here. So the initial interest in this was for golfers, to keep the golf course green. But then a year later, when Santa Rosa and Napa, Sonoma, those fires happened, then it was, wait a minute, a green golf course will be the fire break. It'll be the evacuation zone. So then I invited the fire chief here, I think it was the summer of 2018, and he agreed to come and talk to the community. And he described the golf course being the evacuation zone. Now, at that time, I don't think even the emergency planners at the state level, I don't think they fully understood, because they had never experienced, they had the Berkeley fires years ago, and everybody kind of felt, the state planners felt, oh, it's a unique situation. Narrow roads, too narrow sometimes for 2 cars to pass each other going opposite directions. That's how tight some of those roads are up in the Berkeley and Oakland Hills. So I think they felt that would be unique, and that was it. There wasn't a whole lot of large urban fires to have to plan for until Santa Rosa happened. And that was devastating. And I remember driving up there about a year after the fires. I could not believe the devastation. I mean, as far as you can see, neighborhoods, you could see the streets, you could see the chimneys. There was nothing else. They'd scraped everything else. It's like, oh my gosh, entire neighborhoods wiped out. So that got further reinforced to me how important an irrigated space would be to create that fire break and preserve the fire break. So then, Robert Marshall, Fire Marshall, came and spoke to the community, standing room only at the event center. It was really well received. He did a great job describing, and I think it helped calm people. And then, I don't know, 3 weeks later, a month later, Paradise Fire happened. Mm-hmm. So it's like, oh my God. So, and then after that, really the emergency planning changed at the state level and at CAL FIRE. And it was, okay, you don't wait for an evacuation order anymore. You self-evacuate. If you're not comfortable, get out of town. Go somewhere else. So if they have less people to have to manage when the actual evacuation order happens, mm-hmm. it's better for, preserving life, basically.
Absolutely, yeah.
So then it became obvious to us that water recycling, the real benefit here was not to keep a green golf course for the golfers. It was which is now a secondary benefit. It was to keep that fire break. And for those people that, you can't even imagine what this would be like if it was completely surrounded in flame. You look at the hurricane evacuations in Florida, mm-hmm. and the I-95, both directions, it's just a parking lot. Nobody moving. The 95 runs north and south through the state. Nobody moves. It just doesn't move because they can't. No roads are designed to evacuate 100% of the people that live there. The 680, the 24, it isn't just Rossmore that would be mm-hmm. affected by a fire. It's Lafayette and Moraga and Orinda and Pleasant Hill and other parts of Walnut Creek and Alamo to our south. All these areas, everybody would trying to get out of town. So you have to think, okay, if you can't get out, where would you go?
Right.
You'd have to have a place to go, which is right here in the middle of the valley, which is the green golf courses. And these buildings, the studio, the Creekside complex, the event center, and Gateway are all newer constructed buildings with sprinklers. So if a fire did happen, the fire would be out very quickly in those facilities. So those would likely be places for either respite, mm-hmm. recovery, triage, waiting just to get people out of here, staging for the fire, emergency personnel. That's why the green golf courses are so important. And I know it's a lot of money. And now we're talking about the future a little bit, and we'll talk more about this, I guess, later. But that is really what drove the thinking around water recycling and why this was so important to the Rossmore community. That there's a whole lot of residents here that are probably not ambulatory. We have no idea how many. We're not allowed to ask that question. Mm-hmm. That would be discriminatory. So we don't know. We don't know. Other than what EPO, the Emergency Preparedness Organization, so an entry coordinator ideally knows who is not ambulatory in their entry. That's the whole point, mm-hmm. is that they're the ones who can assist with the evacuation. They can assist the first responders, go to that unit and that unit, they need help. They're homebound or bedbound or whatever.
Right.
Get them out first, or we know they're stuck in their home. So that's why it's so important. And that's, Rossmore is really well prepared. EPO does a great job, but I know that EPO doesn't have entry coordinators for all the entries. There are not enough volunteers to do mm-hmm. that. So there's still more work to be done in that area to continue to make Rossmore safer. But yeah, water recycling, this is why it became so important and as a concept and crazy expensive, but it isn't just for the golfers. And that's the mistake a lot of people are saying, why would we spend all this money on the golfers? It's only 20% of Rossmore plays golf, which is true. But it's really to preserve the property and to keep that fire from spreading through the whole valley.
A lot of this job, too, is really about looking ahead. Where are we going to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? You've been through two processes. 2017, you had the 20-year long-range plan for mm-hmm. capital needs, and more recently this year, the facilities master plan. How key are those? What is that sort of kind of a legacy kind of thing that you're able to leave behind when you go?
Well, so both of those documents, the general plan, I think that it was first drafted in 2011, mm-hmm. and so a resident team drafted it, and then it was intended to be updated every 5 years. And so when I got here, the resident group, a new resident group, was taking a look at that 2011 report and was in the process of updating it. And so I inherited that also as another project when I started here. And I think that I want to say that they presented it to the board in January of 2016, just 2 months after I came to work here. But the board did not adopt it until the fall of 2016. So it took about 10 months to work through it. It's a big document. And that's different than a facility master plan, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the general plan is kind of like, here's all the things that the Golden Rain Foundation does. Here's the way we want the Golden Rain Foundation to be. Here's how we want it to behave. Here's how we want the amenities to look. Here's how we want people to act, ideally, these kinds of things. So they talk about IT and landscaping and public safety and accounting services and all these things. So each kind of department and or amenity was evaluated in the general plan. It's a good document. It's a little unwieldy because it's so big, and so you really, when I refer to it, I don't go and read the whole thing every time. I go and find the chapter that I'm interested in, and I go and focus on that. Now, what does that say again? Remind myself of what those basic, we'll call them tenets, because a lot of that is kind of like, this is kind of the rules, not the rules, but it's really how we want the community to be.
The framework.
The framework, exactly, yeah. So, so the facility master, so we'd finished that in 2016. It should have been adopted again in 2021. We had a little pandemic that kind of got in the way. And
yes, it did.
yeah, so at that time we weren't even meeting in person. So so the board put it off, and it continues to be on hold right now. But something really important that there were two things that I identified when I first got here that so much about Rossmoor is so well done. These amenities are fabulous. The club structure here, it's just so interesting, and I mean everything is done so well here. I know there's residents who would disagree with that, but I can tell you that it continues to impress me at how well things run here.
Me too.
So the other two things that I recognized when I first got here that I was kind of surprised were missing was the homeowners associations by law are required to have a reserve study. But the Golden Rain Foundation is not a homeowners association. So there was no mechanism to look at, say, the cameras that this thing's being recorded on, for example, and say, they have a 5-year life. We need to figure out when they're going to be replaced, and here's how much we think they're going to cost 5 years from now. Or the vehicles are going to last. We keep our vehicles at GRF 25 years. Who keeps a vehicle 25 years? But we do here at the Golden Rain Foundation. And we have a full-time maintenance staff that keep those things running, and they keep it running, and we save a lot of money by doing that. But that was a really important void, that here we have this big organization responsible for millions of dollars of assets, but we didn't know when the streets should be reslurried.
Right.
We have an engineer up there at MOD who keeps track of that, but we as an organization did not have a dollar cost attached to that. We just knew every year, okay, this year it's going to be, Running Springs is going to get repaved this year, or Upper Golden Rain Road is going to get a slurry coat or whatever. And we just get that kind of once a year from the engineering department up there at MOD. But we need to be more sophisticated than that, similar to a reserve study for the mutuals. GRF needed something like that too. So we call it a capital needs assessment, which is what, if you owned commercial property or apartment buildings, you would have a capital needs assessment done periodically, very similar to a reserve study. So that's what we did. We put that together in my first year. It was a daunting task to identify every single asset greater than $5,000 that the Golden Rain Foundation owned, and figure out how old it was, what its useful life was, make an estimate of its replacement cost, and factor in an inflation factor, and then chart all of that on a massive spreadsheet. So we did that. We use it today. And so that was a really important tool that has helped inform our budget process now every year. So the other key component was the buildings themselves. Now the buildings themselves don't fit into this capital needs assessment. We're really looking at equipment, things with a a life shorter than a building. A building's going to last 50 years,
Right.
let's say, or maybe even longer. So lifestyle, or a life less than that, are the things that went into the capital needs assessment. So the facility master plan idea, I remember proposing to the board in multiple times, 2016, 2017, 2018. I couldn't get them interested in it. And maybe it was just too complex of an idea, I don't know. But what we knew was missing was, when do we replace these buildings? When do we should plan for that. Because residents on average live here about 9 years, right? So nobody's gonna live here when this building is at the end of its useful life. Nobody living here today is gonna still likely be here when that
Right.
when this building needs to be redone for whatever reason. So it's incumbent and actually a responsibility in the trust agreement for the Golden Rain Foundation board to address this kind of thing. So I eventually was able to convince them that a facility master plan was a critical thing to do. And so we did, and we've just concluded it. Earlier this year, they adopted it, and just a few months ago this summer, and now we have a facility master plan. And so not only does it chart when existing buildings will get rehabbed or refurbed or whatever, but it also charts possible new amenities that the community might need in the future. An expansion of the Gateway complex, for example, with a multi-story building over the studios. Perhaps a multi-story building up at Hillside. Now that building is very close to the end of its useful life right now.
Wow.
So that's something in the next decade really needs to be paid attention to. Otherwise, you've heard the adage, lipstick on a pig? That's kind of what the Hillside building becomes. MOD is another example. Now MOD is a challenge because all the other structures on this campus are for the benefit of the residents. MOD is not. It indirectly benefits all the residents because it's the lifeblood of
Right.
the community. It's how all the things get fixed around here, right? Your plumbing, your toilet gets backed up, you call MOD. The roof leaks, you call MOD. All these things. So without literally a roof over their head or toilets that are not backing up into the workspace, which has happened twice this summer. That building was designed to be a warehouse, and somebody years ago slapped some drywall on the warehouse skin and made it an office, and never intended to last this long. It's literally a corrugated warehouse shell with drywall and very little in the way of insulation, bad plumbing, and everything else. So that's one that's going to cost a lot of money, and it's not going to be for the direct benefit of it. It's not like building pickleball courts where everybody can get out and play pickleball. This is something but it's essential. It's critical for
It's like the
this
water
community.
heater. You have to do it.
Right. Water heater's going to break. Eventually it's going to go out. You got to replace it.
Right.
And that's where we're at with MOD. Big ticket number that we've got to plan for as well. So so the facility master plan is set up to be a living document. So by design, it's going to be looked at every year in the summertime, which will help lead us into the budget season, which occurs at the end of summer in September. And then anything that needs to be budgeted for, either in the operating budget or in the capital budget, and the capital budget is funded by membership transfer fees. That we'll work through that in the summertime, update the facility master plan, and plan for whatever has to be done for that year, or I should say for the following year's budget.
So on the one hand, you do have these projects that are costly. Let's flip it around. Let's talk about the solar farm, this ability to actually save Rossmore money.
Yeah.
So we've got phase 1 done, phase 2 about to start. Talk a little bit about how that sort of evolved and where we are with that.
So the exploration of solar for Rossmore began with the predecessor to the club now called Sustainable Rossmore. And honestly, I can't remember their name, their old name, which predated me.
Yes.
They had a different name. It might have been Solar Rossmore, something like that. Sorry, I don't remember.
That's
You'll have to
okay.
ask one of the club members.
I will.
But they started the homework on that, did the initial legwork on it, and then made their pitch, is my understanding, to the board. This is, again, before my time. And then right before I was hired, they had hired a consultant to help evaluate this, whether it makes sense and all that. And then that led ultimately to the design, which happened while I was here, and then the decision to put it up on that hillside. which is just up on Rockview across from MOD. So it's 1 megawatt, which is roughly about 60% of GRF's energy needs. So all the lights in the studio, the running gateway, the fitness center, all that power, about 60% of our needs, and the streetlights, is generated by that solar farm. So not 100%. You couldn't put any more solar panels on that hillside. Mm-hmm. So it would have required the next phase, if you will, either over a parking lot, or there aren't any other real good hillsides for that to fit on. And plus, you don't want to blanket your hillsides with solar panels anyway. That one, everybody kind of determined that one was pretty much out of sight from most of the homes in the valley. So it wasn't going to be an eyesore like it might on other ridge lines or that kind of thing. The other option at the time was to put it on, say, the Gateway Clubhouse or the event center, and or the parking lots. And there was a lot of pushback on the design. People, it's hard to imagine. You look at a hillside and it's pristine, it's green in the springtime, it's golden throughout the rest of the year. It's hard to imagine what it was going to look like with a bunch of panels on it. And they did do some schematic drawings, so you kind of had a little bit of an idea, and it actually looks about how they, did it in the design. But still, you didn't want to put it on more hillsides. So when the club handed off their initial legwork on that, and GRF hired the consultant and then a designer, and then entered into what's called a power purchase agreement, which means that we don't own it, but we guarantee the purchase of all of the power that the system generates, 100% of the power. And so they maintain it, they operate it, they make a profit on it. The company that owns it's a company called NextEra Energy. They're one of the biggest energy and solar companies, but they do other types of energy as well. They're headquartered on the East Coast, but they do it all over. They're a huge company. This is among their smallest installations is this one. Wow. So we were very lucky to have gotten in with a very reputable company. So they own it. We buy the power from it. The way it works is the power that it generates gets sent into the grid, into PG&E's grid, and we get credit for it. And then we continue to buy power from PG&E. That's how it works. So it isn't directly powering our energy needs. It's indirectly feeding into the grid, and then we pull power as we need it back from the grid. That's how it works. So the next phase, which the board has already approved, it was on hold just because of when Biden got elected, he was talking about that big infrastructure bill, and a lot of it was going to be for energy efficiency and that kind of thing. And so we kind of waited to see whether there might be some grant monies that we might be eligible for. It doesn't look like that's going to play out that way. But it was worth waiting just to see whether we got any. If they could have covered, a third or half of the cost, we would have taken that in a heartbeat.
Sure.
But that doesn't look like that's going to happen. So, and then what happened is we're now kind of on hold as so we've decided to put it on top of the new pickleball facility on the roof, and over the parking lot at Gateway. So those are going to be the two locations for phase 2. I can tell you that prior to phase 1 being built, a lot of residents made it very, very clear, you are not going to put panels over the Gateway parking lot. They were just horrified that we would, sully the beauty of the valley by doing that. And then a short time later, the Waterford did it on the parking lot right across from Gateway. Now everybody thinks that that's GRF property, and it is not. But all the complaints for that came to me, even though we have nothing to do with the Waterford. They were all angry at me for constructing that over their parking lot. But now, I haven't heard a complaint on that in 3 or 4 years. And the landscaping has grown up around it, and it's kind of become an accepted thing. And then, since then, the BART parking lot in Lafayette, the BART parking lot in Orinda. I'm not even sure if the BART lot up in Walnut Creek has them, but there's solar panels at all these places. All the high schools now have them over their parking areas. They become much more common to see these large industrial type structures with solar panels. The funny thing is, though, I had a resident one day, probably my first year here, It was like a 105-degree day. It was scorching hot. And of course, I'm in my office, it's air conditioning, and I was located in the recreation department at the time. Woman came in, she was all flush-faced. She was very, very upset. She said, "What are you trying to do, kill me?" I said, "No," and I thought she was being funny. And so I just laughed and said, "No, I'm not trying to kill you, honest." And she said, I said, "Why do you think I'm trying to kill you?" And she said, "It's 105 degrees out there and you made me walk across the parking lot because there's no parking up near, close to Gateway. I had to park in the far end of the parking lot." And it's like, so anyway, I think most residents will actually like the shade because it will be the whole parking lot will be shaded, just about the whole parking lot. So
Added bonus.
it'll be an added bonus. I think, and now because it's become more accepted to see those kinds of structures over parking lots, I don't think we'll have as many issues or complaints about it. And it's going to it'll take us from 60% on phase 1 to about 95% of GRF's energy needs covered by solar, which is, outstanding. And, let's see, over 25 years, phase 1 was going to save us around $6 million in energy. And that was very conservatively forecasted. That was using, I think, a 4% inflation factor on PG&E's rates for 25 years. PG&E's rates go up faster than 4%.
Oh, yeah.
So I think in the long run, it's going to be quite a bit more than $6 million. Phase 2, not going to save as much. It's not as big of an installation, but it should save, $1 to $2 million probably over the life of the structure. And so in any case, it's going to more than pay for itself, and by a significant amount. So I think in our future, I mean, that's the way of the future for California, period. Yep. Not just Rossmore, but all of us here in California. We've got to become more energy efficient. The price of oil, and all that just continues to go up. Solar makes a lot of sense. And then you have to use, gas-fired energy after hours, but, with the PG&E. But at least during the daytime, we're going to be more than covered.
That's great. So now as our time's starting to wrap up here, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
You've done a lot in 7 years. Can you pick the 1 or 2 accomplishments, projects, accomplishments overall, that you think you're probably going to remember the most, good or bad?
Yeah. Yep, I would say the fitness center, probably right at the top of the list. There are probably 3 of these that are, 3 that are coming to mind right at the moment.
Okay.
So I'd say the fitness center, that is, until the pandemic, that was by far our most popular amenity. It was amazing. We were at, I think, around 240,000 visits in 2019. Pandemic started in March of 2020. Yeah, so 2019, we're 240,000 visits. And it was still going up. So had the pandemic not happened, we probably would have hit 300,000 by now.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so, and that's only with at that time, about 3,500 registered users, residents. So about a third of the community. But even at a third of the community, that's our most popular amenity. Not everybody wants to work out, not everybody wants to play golf, not everybody wants to use the bus.
Right.
But those are probably, in order, our next most popular amenities. But by far, there's no comparison. Golf at that time was 55,000 rounds of golf. Today, we're over 80,000 rounds of golf. The pandemic made that happen. And the fitness center use has dropped way, way down. I think we're around 15,000, 16,000 visits right now. But people aren't yet quite ready to reconvene indoors and exert, yet until the pandemic probably still dies down a little bit. So I'd say that's right at the top. The Comcast deal was extraordinary. Yeah. I think now, because we did an amendment to the agreement a few years ago where we got that, they called it the sports entertainment package. It was a $10 monthly add-on retail, and we got it for $2.20, I think. You can do the math on that, but it's, and there's another $1.5 million a year savings or something like that. And that got you the NFL Network, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, National Hockey League. It got all kinds of stuff, all included for $2.20. But the total savings over the life of this contract is about $65 million.
That's amazing.
That's your internet and your TV. That is an extraordinary savings. that everybody here gets direct benefit of. It's still at I think it's $57 a month now, so great deal. The solar, I would say, is probably that, and then the facility master plan. I mean, I could come up with a whole bunch of these, but yeah.
I think it's ironic that the three you've named were the three folders you were handed by Warren when you got here.
Yeah, unfinished projects here, Tim. Take these. These are going to be your legacy, which I guess in hindsight it is. But all the other things, the traffic and safety study. I mean, that has probably saved lives. Oh no, you know what? Getting us through the pandemic. Man, how do I forget that?
Maybe you want to forget that.
That is more the case. And honestly, that's probably the biggest reason why it's time for me to retire. It wore me out. It wiped me out. Keeping 10,000 seniors who are at the highest risk of not just getting the infection, but dying from it every day, that toll was immense. In the early part of the pandemic, beginning of March till the beginning of May, I went 7 weeks without a day off. Every single day, between 12 and 18-hour days, every single day for 7 weeks. And that was a year we didn't even get a pay raise. I didn't get a bonus, never got a bonus. I never got a pay raise. But really trying to keep, terrified that thing was going to make its way in here. And the beginning, we didn't know what this thing was, remember? Right. In March of 2020. And I think that's probably my biggest accomplishment. The county public health director at one point said to me probably earlier this year, he said, Tim, you're probably not getting a lot of thanks for what you did there, but you should know that you saved lives. And from the county's perspective, thanks. And because the county health system, which is the county hospital up in Martinez, John Muir Health, and Kaiser, could not have handled a mass infection here in Rossmore. If we had hundreds or thousands of people infected, and which would have meant hundreds of people dying in this community, the health system could not have handled it. So yeah, we shut down 11 days before the state did. If they could have set up a set of gallows on the golf course, they would have strung me up, I think. I mean, there were people that were so angry, screaming at me, cussing at me, every day, all day. It's all I heard, people complaining. Very upset about shutting things down. What right do you have to shut things down? It's against the law. I'm going to call they did. They called the county, they called the legislatures, they demanded that they ordered GRF to reopen its facilities. It's like, it was hard. It was really tough. And, up until April of this year, April of 22, which is kind of at the waning end of Omicron. Remember, Omicron spiked around November, December, and that's when it really kicked into gear this past December. January, February, March, the numbers kept going up and up and up and up, not just here, but everywhere in the country. Yeah. And then by June, they actually hit their peak, but not here. So in April, and that's when the state started relaxing things in April of this year. They started opening things back up again. Masking wasn't going to be required. And that's why the numbers spiked again in June. It's because everybody was removing their masks. But up until that point, I was only aware of 2 people that had passed away from COVID in Rossmore. Only 2. And if we had just mirrored the state's numbers, we should have had several hundred deaths from COVID. If we had just done the same percentage that the state of California had. If you had applied the age bracket here, the death rate to the age bracket, it would have been much, much higher, and probably thousands of infections. So the fact that we got at least through April kept people safe, that was what was so important to me. So we did. I'm tired. It's time for a break.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that things are open so we can have this opportunity to talk face to face, your final talk with us. But we really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
And for our residents, just to let everyone know, please check the back page of the B section of the Rossmore News or rossmore.com for the TV guide to see our second episode, which will look at the future of where Rossmore's headed and Tim's thoughts on that. Thank you for joining us.